I didn't just buy a lakefront lot. I unknowingly signed a declaration of war. At least, that's what it felt like 3 weeks later when a crisp white envelope showed up in my mailbox, stamped with a logo of a law firm that looked expensive enough to have its own views on morality. The paper inside wasn't friendly. It wasn't curious. It certainly wasn't neighborly. It was a threat. But I'm getting ahead of myself. It started with the land. It always does. I've been working for 15 years straight without a real break. Emails at midnight, deadlines before sunrise, conference calls that felt more like interrogations. My brain was a burnt-out wire, constantly buzzing, constantly sparking. When my father passed, he left me nothing but a rusted fishing reel, and one piece of advice he'd repeated throughout my childhood. Buy land no one can tell you what to do with. That sentence stuck with me longer than any degree or job title. So when I saw the listing for a lakefront lot just outside a gated HOA community, it felt like fate. 1/2 mile of clear blue water, old pine trees, untouched shoreline, and most importantly, 3 magical words in the description: no HOA jurisdiction. The price was suspiciously reasonable. The agent, a tired-looking man named Russell, leaned in when he told me about it. People passed on it because of the community next door, he said quietly. They're territorial. Territorial. I should have asked more questions right then. But instead, I saw peace. I saw mornings with fog drifting over still water. I saw myself sitting on a wooden dock with coffee in hand, silence wrapping around me like a blanket. I saw healing. I signed. The first week after closing felt like a dream. The lake moved gently. The air smelled like wet earth and pine resin. I built a temporary fire pit and stared into the flames, letting years of stress melt into the date. Then the first visitor arrived. A woman in pressed white pants and oversized sunglasses marched onto my property without so much as a hello. She didn't smile. She pointed. You can't have that fire pit there. I blinked. I can have whatever I want here. She scoffed. This community has standards. I stood up slowly and brushed dirt off my hands. This community doesn't own this land. Her lips tightened into a line so thin it almost disappeared. You'll be hearing from us. I thought she was bluffing. The second week, more of them came, couples walking slowly along my shoreline like it was their daily parade route. They'd stop, whisper, glare. The third week, I got the envelope. Cease and desist. Unauthorized structures. Environmental violations. Visual nuisance. They accused me of ruining the aesthetic harmony of their $1 million lakeside views. Aesthetic harmony. That's when it hit me. They weren't worried about rules. They weren't worried about pollution or property lines. They were worried about control. And something inside me shifted. Because if there's one thing I learned growing up, it's that people who try to control land they don't own rarely stop after the first warning. The letter ended with a polite threat. Failure to comply will result in legal action. I laughed, out loud, alone, by the fire. And in that moment, I asked myself a question that would change everything that followed. What happens when people use the law as a weapon against someone who refuses to bow? That night, the lake was perfectly still. But somewhere behind the pine trees, the war had already started. The funny thing about bullies in nice clothes is that they've never met anyone who doesn't care about their rules. I read that legal letter again the next morning, sitting on an old camping chair by the water. The words didn't scare me anymore. They annoyed me. And there's a big difference between fear and irritation. Fear makes you hide, but irritation makes you plan. By noon, I'd driven back into town and made my first important stop. A lawyer. Not just any lawyer. I wanted the kind of lawyer who didn't smile too much and didn't promise miracles. I found her in a quiet brick building with a cracked front step and a brass nameplate that read, Marjorie Hale, Property and Land Use Attorney. She read the letter slowly. No reactions. No eyebrow raises. Just calm. When she finally looked up at me, she said 5 words that made my shoulders relax for the first time in weeks. They have no authority here. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Are you sure? She tapped the desk with a pen. You're outside their jurisdiction. They can complain. They can posture. They can waste money. But they can't force you to do a thing. I could have stopped there. I could have just relaxed and ignored them. But something darker had started to bloom in my chest. What happens if they don't stop? I asked. A slow, knowing smile pulled at the corner of her mouth. Then, she said, we remind them of that fact publicly. By the time I drove back to the lake, I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. That week, the harassment got worse. More letters, nastier language, warnings printed in bold red fonts like I was a teenager being grounded by strangers. Someone reported me for unauthorized vegetation changes because I cleared a few dead branches. Another complaint accused me of commercial activity because my brother came to visit with a pickup truck. They weren't just trying to scare me. They were trying to exhaust me. And that's when I realized something important. They didn't want to fight. They wanted me tired. They wanted me broke. They wanted me gone. I stopped reacting. I started documenting. Every person who stepped onto my land without permission, camera, every threatening letter, scanned, every false report, logged. I installed security cameras, not hidden, not secretive, big, obvious ones. I wanted them to see them. I wanted the message to be clear. I'm watching you now, too. One morning, I woke up to tire tracks cutting across the back edge of my property. Deep ones. Deliberate ones. Someone had driven through the mud near the tree line, just far enough to avoid the cameras. That wasn't a complaint. That was intimidation. I sent the photos to Marjorie. Her reply was instant. That's criminal, not civil. And that's when the game changed. The HOA's official lawyer finally showed their face a few days later. He didn't come in person. He sent a thicker envelope, heavier paper, more impressive seal. This one wasn't just a warning. It was a lawsuit. They claimed my property was a de facto extension of their community, that my land negatively impacted their property values, and that I created hostile environmental conditions. Hostile? From a fire pit in a dock. I laughed again, but this time there was no humor in it. This was about pride now. I met Marjorie again that afternoon. She flipped through the pages fast, like she'd been waiting for it. They overplayed their hand, she said. How? I asked. She pointed to a paragraph buried in the middle of the filing. They admitted they'd been monitoring your property without consent, she said. Photos, notes, timelines. My stomach dropped. That's illegal. She nodded, and it's beautiful. That single admission changed everything. We filed a counterclaim the next day. Harassment, trespass, invasion of privacy, civil conspiracy, and we attached everything I'd documented. Every trespass, every threat, every false report, every track through the mud. The first court date was set. The HOA thought they were dragging me into their world. They didn't realize they had walked straight into mine. The morning before the hearing, I stood by the lake again, the water calm and reflective, like it was watching everything unfold. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Drop the case. You don't know who you're dealing with. I stared at the screen. I didn't reply. I screenshot it, and I sent it straight to Marjorie. By the time I slipped the phone back into my pocket, one truth had settled deep into my bones. They weren't just trying to control my land anymore. They were trying to scare me into silence. And I would rather burn the whole fight to the ground than give them that satisfaction. The court date was coming, and they had no idea what I was about to do. The courtroom didn't look like a battlefield, but that's exactly what it was. Wood-paneled walls. A faint smell of old paper and furniture polish. A clock ticking way too loud. On one side sat the HOA's legal team. 3 suits, 2 laptops, one arrogant smirk that never seemed to leave the lead attorney's face. On the other side sat me, Marjorie Hale, and a simple black folder. They thought I was unprepared. That folder was everything. The judge was a tired-looking man in his late 50s, the kind who'd heard every story, every excuse, every lie. He flipped through the HOA's complaint first, nodding slowly like he'd seen this kind of thing 100 times. Then he turned to us. Mr. Carter, he said, adjusting his glasses, how do you respond? Marjorie stood before I could move. We respond with evidence, she said calmly. The smirk across the aisle faded. This hearing wasn't about winning. It was about setting a trap. She began with the surveillance. Photos the HOA had taken, not from public roads, not from public property. close-ups, angles, dates, times, trespass, then the threat letters, escalations in tone, language growing more aggressive, more impatient, harassment, then the tire tracks, then the text message, drop the case. You don't know who you're dealing with. The judge leaned forward as that one hit the screen. You received this during litigation, he asked. Yes, Your Honor, Marjorie replied. The HOA's attorney suddenly found the ceiling fascinating. The judge turned to him slowly. Would you like to explain this? Silence. The trap snapped shut quietly, but firmly. The judge didn't dismiss their case. Not yet, but he issued something far more dangerous for them. A temporary restraining order. No HOA member was allowed within 100 feet of my property. No communication allowed. No surveillance. No complaints filed with city or county agencies related to my land. And most importantly, all existing evidence was ordered preserved. That order scared them more than I realized at the time. But I would soon understand why. When I drove back to the lake that evening, the quiet felt different. It wasn't peaceful anymore. It felt watchful. The cameras were still up. The lake still moved gently along the shoreline. But something darker sat behind this calm. That night, my neighbor from the far side of the lake, not part of the HOA, finally approached me. His name was Walter. Older guy, sun-worn face, beer in hand. You pissed him off good, he said. I smiled. That was a goal. He didn't laugh. You don't know their history, do you? That caught me off guard. History? He leaned against a tree and stared across the water toward the fancy houses hidden behind pine walls. That community used to extend onto your land. Decades ago, developer went bankrupt. The land got split wrong. Paperwork disappeared. A lot of people with a lot of money got told no for the first time. My stomach tightened. They think they lost something that was already theirs, Walter continued. And people like that don't just give up. I felt a shift inside me again. Not fear, not panic. Something colder. Why didn't anyone warn me? He shrugged. Most people don't ask. That night, instead of sleeping, I started researching. Old county records, archived zoning maps, yellowed survey documents digitized and buried in government databases. Walter was right. My piece of land was supposed to be part of the original luxury development, but it never legally was. A failed deal, a missing signature, a bankruptcy sealed decades ago. They didn't just want control. They wanted it back. The next day, Marjorie called me before I could call her. They tried to settle, she said. Already? I asked. She let out a short breath. That's not the scary part. What is? They tried to file for an emergency injunction at 2 a.m. My jaw clenched. Is that even legal? It's desperate, she said, and desperation makes people sloppy. That's when she told me the part that changed everything. They've been deleting things. I didn't speak. Complaint logs, HOA board emails, internal records, stuff that suddenly started disappearing right after the judge ordered preservation. My hands curled into fists. That's evidence tampering. Her voice hardened. That's criminal. That night, as I stood by the lake again, I realized something important. This wasn't just about me anymore. This wasn't just about land. They had crossed a line that had nothing to do with property. And for the first time, I wasn't reacting. I was waiting. Because if they were deleting records, then they were afraid. And if they were afraid, they were about to make their biggest mistake yet. The smartest thing I did wasn't fighting back. It was staying quiet. Silence makes arrogant people nervous. Nervous people make bad decisions. And bad decisions leave marks you can't erase. The HOA had already crossed from civil dispute territory into criminal behavior, and they didn't even realize how exposed they were. They thought deleting emails would save them. They thought moving files around would clean their tracks. They were wrong. Very wrong. Marjorie shifted the strategy without even asking me first. One morning, she called and said, "Stop doing anything public." That was it. No explanation. No long speech. Just go dark. So I did. No social media posts. No visible construction. I stopped responding to everything but my lawyer. From their point of view, it looked like I was tired, like I was scared, like I was preparing to fold. That illusion was the bait. Behind the scenes, Marjorie filed a quiet motion with the court, forensic data preservation, a digital autopsy. The judge granted it without fanfare. What that meant, a neutral third party was now legally allowed to examine the HOA's email servers, internal systems, complaint logs, and archive communications. Every deleted file? Not gone, just buried. A week went by. Then two. Then the phone rang. Marjorie was unusually quiet when she spoke. They panicked, she said. What did they do? I asked. They tried to overwrite their own backup drives. That was the sound of people lighting the match while standing in the gasoline. Overwriting backups wasn't just suspicious. It was a crime. Now, the case wasn't a civil mess about land and boundaries. It was a criminal investigation dressed in a civil suit. But we didn't expose it. Not yet. We watched, and they kept digging. The HOA board started turning on each other. We could see it in the recovered emails. Blame shifting. Finger pointing. Panic rising. One message stood out. From the HOA president to the board. If this gets out, we are all finished. That line was better than any confession. Then came the surprise. A certified letter arrived at my cabin. Not from their lawyer. From the HOA president herself. It wasn't threatening. It wasn't arrogant. It was polite. She requested a private meeting. No lawyers. No court. Just coffee. Marjorie's answer was immediate. Absolutely not. But revenge, real revenge, isn't loud. It's calculated. I went. We met at a small lakeside cafe about 10 miles from both our properties. Quiet place. Neutral ground. She looked different in civilian clothes. No power suit. No polished smile. Just tired eyes. You don't understand what you walked into, she said after the coffee arrived. I understand perfectly, I replied. You tried to erase me. She leaned forward. That land was supposed to be ours. Supposed to be doesn't mean legally is. She tightened her jaw. If this case turns criminal, it won't just hurt us. It already is criminal, I said calmly. You crossed that line yourselves. She didn't deny it. That told me everything. She lowered her voice. What do you want? I smiled into my coffee. This isn't a negotiation. Her hands shook slightly. She hid them quickly. She finally said the quiet part out loud. We can make this go away. That was the moment. Not when I got sued. Not when they trespassed. Not when they threatened me. This was the moment revenge stopped being emotional and became surgical. I leaned back in my chair. No, I said. You already showed me who you are. She left without finishing her coffee. The next week, Marjorie filed the most devastating document I'd ever seen. A motion to refer the case to the district attorney. Harassment, stalking, evidence tampering, witness intimidation. All of it, attached with recovered emails, screenshots, metadata, and that one beautiful line from their internal panic. If this gets out, we are all finished. We didn't celebrate. We didn't gloat. We waited. Because real revenge doesn't explode. It tightens slowly. And it was almost tight enough to snap. The first knock didn't come from a neighbor. It came from the state. Black sedan. Government plates. Two people in plain clothes. Calm. Professional. Unimpressed. They weren't there for me. They were there for them. I watched from across the lake 2 days later as unmarked cars quietly lined the street outside the HOA's gates. No sirens. No flashing lights. Just people with folders stepping out of cars and walking toward houses I had never imagined being on the wrong side of power. Word spread fast. The HOA's perfect neighborhood turned quiet in a way that wasn't peaceful. Curtains stayed closed. Cars didn't move. Porch lights flicked on in the middle of the day. Panic has a smell. And it was thick in the air. Marjorie called me that afternoon. They executed search warrants, she said. For what? I asked. She paused. Everything. Servers, laptops, phones, external drives. Some of the board members had already lawyered up. Some were trying to backpedal. Some weren't answering their doors at all. The lawsuit they filed against me, it vanished. Withdrawn. No explanation. No apology. They were trying to clean their hands. It didn't work. A week passed. Then another. And then the arrest started. Not dramatic. Not public. Quiet knocks. Quiet handcuffs. Quiet ruined reputations. The HOA president didn't get arrested right away. She tried to disappear instead. The phone rang at midnight. Unknown number. I answered. Her voice was breaking. "They are coming," she said. I said nothing. "They are treating us like criminals." I let the silence stretch as long as it needed to. "You became criminals," I finally replied. She hung up. The next day, she was gone. Moved out. House for sale. HOA board dissolved. The neighborhood that tried to control land it didn't own collapsed from the inside. That should have been the end. But revenge is a second layer when it's owned. Remember Walter, the old man from across the lake? He called me one morning, his voice shaking. "They are trying to dump this all on you," he said. "What do you mean?" "They are telling people you baited them, that you planned this, that you wanted to trap them." I laughed, not because it was funny, because it was pathetic. They were losing control of the narrative, and losing control scares powerful people more than losing money. So we released everything, not emotionally, not loudly, legally, public court filings, evidence logs, recovered emails, no spin, no commentary, just truth. And the truth was ugly. Local news didn't need drama. The documents spoke for themselves. A wealthy private community systematically trying to intimidate a private landowner, using surveillance, threats, false complaints, deleted evidence. They weren't villains in a movie. They were worse. They were real. The public pressure created something money couldn't stop. Subpoenas, civil audits, property boundary reinvestigations. That old paperwork era from decades ago, now under an actual microscope. Turns out, their original developer hadn't just failed. He'd lied. Fraud. Forgery. Quiet land grabs hidden in old filings. And my lot? It wasn't just outside their jurisdiction. Legally, historically, contractual, it was never meant to be theirs. They weren't trying to reclaim something lost. They were trying to keep a lie alive. I stood by the lake one evening and watched the sun sink into the water, painting everything gold and bloody red. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel victory. I felt calm. They didn't lose because I was stronger. They lost because they were dirty. And I was patient. Marjorie called that night. "They are offering a settlement," she said. I exhaled slowly. "From who?" "3 insurance companies. 2 law firms. What's left of the HOA's legal representation." Settlement meant money. A lot of it. Enough to make the story disappear. Enough to make me disappear. I looked out at the lake. The fire pit. The quiet. The land they tried to steal. "I'm not doing this for the money," I said. She was quiet for a long moment. "Then we push it to the end." And that's when I understood something deeper than revenge. They didn't deserve mercy. They deserved exposure. And the end was coming faster than they realized. Got it. Before I write Section 6, note that it must contain named entities like organizations or places, and I will format them correctly for you in that final part. The final hearing wasn't dramatic. There were no shouting matches, no slam gavels, no tears in the courtroom. Just silence. Heavy, humiliating silence. By the time the case reached a conclusion, it was no longer me versus a homeowners association. The HOA barely existed anymore. It was fragments of a broken organization trying to survive what they'd done. The courtroom was packed, not with supporters, with observers, developers, real estate attorneys, county officials, journalists, people who suddenly realized this case wasn't small. It was a warning. The prosecution wasn't coming from me anymore. It came from the state. The case was formally taken over by the district attorney's office. They weren't interested in land disputes. They were interested in crimes. When the judge spoke, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. What he read out was calm, clinical, and devastating. Findings of coordinated harassment, illegal surveillance, destruction of evidence, fraudulent property documentation, and something else that surprised the room. They'd been doing it before me. I wasn't the first person who resisted them. I was just the one who didn't back down. Several former property owners stepped forward, people who had quietly sold their land years ago because they were tired, scared, or threatened into silence. That silence was gone now. The HOA, the name that used to mean exclusive and elite, became synonymous with something else entirely: corruption. By the time the verdicts were issued, no one clapped. No one celebrated. The gavel fell, and the world just adjusted. The HOA's remaining assets were seized. Several board members were charged. Civil penalties stacked up so high they might as well have been tombstones. And then came the final twist. The county reviewed all surrounding land titles. Dozens of them had been adjusted decades ago. Illegally. My lakefront lot wasn't the anomaly. It was a proof. The original development project was officially reopened and investigated through the County Land Records Office, and the number of properties affected was larger than anyone expected. The story spread quietly, not sensationalized, not dramatized, just documented. Years of bullying finally written in ink instead of whispers. And me? I went back to my lake. No reporters, no interviews, no victory speeches, just water, trees, silence. Walter came by one last time, carrying 2 beers. "You won," he said. I shook my head. "I finished." There's a difference. Winning is loud. Finishing is permanent. Months passed. Then a year. The land stayed mine. The lake stayed calm. And one morning, as fog rolled low over the water, I opened my mailbox and found a thin envelope. No threats. No lawsuits. No warnings. Just a short letter from a stranger who'd been watching the case quietly. It said, "Because of you, they couldn't do it to me." I sat on the dock for a long time after reading that. Revenge isn't always about destruction. Sometimes it's about stopping something rotten so it can never grow back. They thought I bought land they could control. They thought they could scare me off it. They thought the law was something they could bend. What they never understood was this. I didn't buy the land for power. I bought it for peace. And when they tried to take that, they gave me a reason to take everything they had instead. The lake was quiet. The fire burned low. And for the first time since this all started, there was nothing left to fight. Just freedom, and water, and land that finally belonged to no one but me.